first time I saw my wedding ring on another woman's hand, I was 7 months pregnant. My ankles were swollen inside shoes that no longer fit, and my husband had already told half the city I was too emotionally unstable to leave the house. She was standing beneath a chandelier the size of a small moon, laughing into a champagne glass, wearing a red dress so tight it looked painted onto her body. She kept lifting her hand when she talked, and every time she did, the diamond caught the light and flashed like a blade. My diamond, my ring, the ring my father designed before he died. The ring Damien slid onto my finger while promising that, no matter how cruel the world got, I would never have to face it alone. That woman, her name was Sienna, though I didn't know it, then tilted her head back and laughed at something my husband whispered into her ear. Then she turned, saw me standing there with one palm instinctively resting over my stomach, and for one suspended, impossible second, none of us moved. Damien went white, she looked confused, and I stared at the ring. Not because I wanted it back, not because it was expensive, not even because it was sentimental. I stared at it because buried inside that ring, hidden beneath the platinum setting in a compartment so small no ordinary jeweler would ever notice it, was a tracker only 2 people had ever known existed, my father and me. So when my husband's new girlfriend smiled politely and asked if we had met before, I almost laughed. Because in that instant, while music floated through the ballroom and rich people kept drinking and pretending not to notice the tension curdling the air, I understood something Damien did not. He thought he had stolen my dignity. He thought he had stolen my future. He thought he had handed another woman my marriage like a trophy. What he had actually done was hand me the map that would lead me straight to every lie he had buried. And by the time that night was over, one of us was going to lose everything. If you had met me a year earlier, you would never have guessed my life would turn into the kind of story people whisper about behind closed doors. I was not reckless. I was not naive in the way people mean when they want to blame a woman for loving the wrong man. I was careful, thoughtful, the kind of person who read labels, double-checked contracts, remembered birthdays, and sent thank you notes. I was raised by a father who taught me that love was not supposed to make you smaller, it was supposed to make you steadier. My father, Gabriel Hart, made jewelry for a living though. Saying it, that simply never felt fair. He wasn't the kind of jeweler who sat under bright luxury displays selling pieces to strangers with rehearsed charm. He worked with his hands in a quiet workshop that smelled like cedar shavings, polishing cloth, coffee, and fire. He designed pieces with hidden meanings, tiny mechanisms, inscriptions only visible under magnification, lockets that opened in unusual ways, cufflinks with compartments, pendants that held ashes or vows or secrets people weren't ready to show. The world, he used to say, the most valuable thing a person could wear was never the diamond, it was the story. When I was 26, I lost him to a stroke so sudden it felt like the sky had come down and pinned me beneath it. One day he was teasing me for overwatering the fern in his studio, and the next I was signing hospice paperwork with hands so numb I could barely hold the pen. There are griefs that split your life in two before and after. Losing him was mine. I met Damien Vale 8 months later. If you've never known a man like Damien, I envy you. Men like him are dangerous because they do not arrive looking dangerous. They arrive looking like rescue. He was polished without seeming vain, wealthy without seeming vulgar, attentive without seeming clingy. He remembered details. He listened with his whole face. He made ordinary kindness look effortless. When he learnt my father had died, he did not offer clumsy pity. He just sat beside me on a charity panel after everyone else had left and said, very quietly, "You still speak about him in the present tense. That means he built himself into you." People like that don't really leave. I cried in front of him that night, and I almost never cried in front of anyone. He built luxury residential towers and boutique hotels. Old money admired him because he made more of it. New money admired him because he knew how to disguise ambition as refinement. Women admired him because he had that particular confidence rich men wear when the world has never forced them to doubt their own reflection. But he focused on me with a gentleness so specific, so consistent, that I felt chosen in the deepest possible way. At first, everyone loved him. My sister Ava said he looked at me like I was the only person in a crowded room. My friend said he softened around me. Even people who disliked wealthy men as a species admitted Damien seemed different. I thought so too. The truth is, he was different. He was different. Was better at pretending. By the time we married, I had convinced myself I was one of the lucky ones. The proposal happened on the roof terrace of a restored hotel Damien's company had renovated downtown. He had arranged candles, not too many, just enough to make the city lights look intimate. He gave a speech that made my knees weak, he said. He wanted to build a life with me that felt safe, honest, alive. Then he opened a velvet box, and inside was the ring my father had designed but never finished before he died. I nearly stopped breathing. Damien told me he had found the sketches among my father's things, tracked down one of the craftsmen who had apprenticed under him, and completed the design in secret. The center stone was elegant rather than gaudy, held in a setting that curved like joined hands. Along the inside of the band, almost invisible, were 6 tiny engraved words, "You were never lost to love." It was such a perfect thing to do that. I thought only a man who truly loved me could have done it. What I did not know then was that Damien had not done it alone. My father had left notes, detailed ones, and among those notes was a private instruction meant only for me. A week after the proposal, my father's old friend Matteo the craftsman Damien had asked me to stop by his studio. He locked the front door, placed the ring on a cloth beneath a bright lamp, and told me there was one feature Gabriel had insisted on adding. It was originally for security, he said. Your father knew the stone would be valuable. He also knew some men treat symbols like property. He wanted you to have a way to find it if it was ever taken from you. Then he showed me the hidden compartment and the tracker. I remember laughing through tears, because it was exactly the sort of thing my father would do. Practical, tender, faintly dramatic. Matteo linked the tracker to an encrypted app and told me only someone who knew where to press, how long to hold, and what pattern to follow could access the mechanism. Gabriel said this ring should never become a cage, he told me. It leaves your hand against your will. It should tell you where it went. I never told Damien, not because I distrusted him, just because the secret felt like one last private conversation between my father and me. For a while, my marriage was beautiful in the way early happiness often is. Too bright to imagine shadow. Damien would kiss my forehead in the kitchen while reading market reports. He would pull me against him at formal events with a possessive warmth I mistook for devotion. He told everyone I made his homes feel like places people could actually live in, he said. I calmed him. He said I made him better. Asterisk when I got pregnant, he cried. That memory haunted me later more than almost anything else, because those tears looked real. His hand shook when he held the positive test. He dropped to his knees in front of me, pressed his face against my stomach even though there was barely anything to feel yet, and whispered, "You have no idea how long I've wanted this." I believed him. I built entire futures on the foundation of that moment. The first few weeks were gentle. He came to appointments. He downloaded baby apps. He argued lovingly about names. At night he would rest his palm over my abdomen and speak to our child in a low voice that made me smile in the dark. He wanted a girl, he said, because girls were stronger. I told him girls had to be stronger because the world rarely gave them another choice. He kissed me and said our daughter would never have to fight anything alone. Then, slowly, so slowly, I didn't know how to name it at first. Something changed. It began with absences. Damien had always worked long hours, but now, his delays felt curated. He stopped calling when meetings ran late. He started stepping outside to take certain phone calls. At dinner he looked at his screen more than my face. When I talked about the baby, he listened with a kind of patient distance that felt polite. Instead of engaged, as if my pregnancy had become a presentation, he was too busy to interrupt. Then came irritation. Not open cruelty. Not at first. Just those tiny dismissals that make a woman question whether she is too sensitive. He would sigh when I asked if he could be home earlier. He would say things like, "Lila, I can't make," every conversation about nursery paint and prenatal vitamins, with a smile that made it sound harmless. When I cried one night because he missed another appointment, he held up both hands like I was the one escalating things and said, "Pregnancy. Hormones are brutal, huh?" I hated that sentence on sight, Dad. My body was changing in loud, uncomfortable ways. My back ached. I couldn't sleep more than 2 hours without waking. Smells I used to love made me nauseous. And beneath all of that, I had a growing, instinctive need for reassurance. Not coddling, just steadiness. But every time I reached for Damien emotionally, I seemed to irritate him more. He began making decisions without telling me. He changed our financial manager. Because the old one was too conservative, he moved funds between accounts and brushed it off as tax strategy. One afternoon my card declined at a pharmacy while I was buying prenatal supplements. Ginger chews, and lotion for skin that felt stretched too thin. I stood there flushed with embarrassment while the cashier tried again. Then again, when I called Damien from the parking lot, humiliated and close to tears, he sounded annoyed. "Oh, that card should have been replaced already," he said. "Had my office freeze a few accounts temporarily. A few accounts are repeated. Damien, I had to put back medicine because my card got declined. You're overreacting. I'm pregnant. I shouldn't have to wonder if I can buy medicine." He exhaled sharply. "And you won't. I'm handling it. That's what I do. Handle things." It was the first time I truly heard the ownership in his voice. Not husband.manager.warden. When I told Ava. She came over that same night carrying takeout and suspicion. Ava was younger than me by 3 years but had the instincts of a woman born. With a storm sensor in her chest, she ran a small bakery with her wife, Donnie, and had never trusted men who wore expensive watches with soft voices. She watched me waddle to the couch, set food on the table, and said, "How bad is it really?" I wanted to defend him. Instead, I cried into a paper napkin. Ava didn't say, "I told you so." She just sat beside me and rubbed my shoulder until I could breathe again. "Do you think he's cheating?" she asked eventually. I said no too quickly. That was the first answer that scared me. Because when your mouth lies before your mind can think, some part of you already knows the truth. It would be simpler if betrayal announced itself cleanly. If lipstick on a collar or a stranger's perfume ended all ambiguity. But real betrayal is usually made of smaller pieces. A changed password. An unexplained charge. A laugh that stops when you enter the room. A perfume you don't own drifting off a jacket sleeve. The feeling that your home has become a stage and you are the only person who doesn't have a script. I'd found the first real crack one afternoon while looking for an insurance form in Damien's home office. I wasn't snooping, at least not at first. I had a file folder in one hand and a glass of water in the other when I noticed a receipt tucked halfway beneath his keyboard. A room at the Marlowe Hotel. 2 guests. Champagne service. Late checkout. The date was from a night he had told me he was in Chicago. I stared at it until my vision blurred. There are moments when your whole body knows something, your heart, that still refuses to accept. My stomach went cold, not metaphorically, physically cold, as if ice water had been poured through my veins. The baby kicked hard enough to make me gasp, and I remember whispering, "I know, baby, I know." That night I asked him directly. Not screaming, not dramatic. I simply held up the receipt while he loosened his tie in our bedroom and said, "Why? Did you tell me you were in Chicago when you were at the Marlowe with someone else?" He didn't panic. That was the terrifying part. He glanced at the receipt, then at me, and gave that kind of small, disappointed smile people use when a child misunderstands something obvious. It was a client meeting at midnight. The room was booked. For privacy, for 2 guests. He dropped his cufflinks onto the dresser and turned fully toward me. "Do you hear yourself?"
Yeah.
"You're digging through my office, finding scraps of paperwork, and inventing scenarios because you're emotional." "I'm not inventing anything, Lila." He softened his voice, which somehow made it worse. "You are pregnant, exhausted, and not thinking clearly. I'm not going to punish you for that, but I'm also not going to dignify paranoia." That word landed like a slap. Paranoia. He took a step closer, touched my elbow, and lowered his voice even further. "You need rest. You need less stress. I've been trying to protect you from things you don't need to carry right now." "Protect me?" I almost laughed, and said I pulled my arm away. That night he slept in the guest room, and the next morning his mother called. Celeste Vale had perfected the kind of cruelty that wore pearls. She never raised her voice. She never used words crude enough to quote. She just threaded contempt through concern so elegantly that objecting made you look unreasonable. From the beginning, she had treated me like an acceptable but temporary disruption in her son's life. Pretty enough, polite enough, not quite bred for permanence. "Damien says you're overwhelmed," she said, her voice smooth as cream poured over poison. "Pregnancy can be so destabilizing, especially for women who are already sensitive." I said nothing. "Do be careful not to push him away with accusations. Dear men under pressure need peace at home, not hysteria." After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen island and stared at my reflection in the black screen of the espresso machine. I remember one clear thought sliding through my mind like a blade. They're preparing a story about me. Once I noticed that, I saw it everywhere. The valet who looked away too quickly. The housekeeper who suddenly became formal instead of warm. The assistant who told me Damien was unavailable even when I could hear his voice in the background. He was laying groundwork, quietly, carefully, painting me as unstable, irrational, difficult, building a version of events in which whatever he did next would look justified. A week later, he took my ring. I had been struggling with swelling in my hands. By evening, the band felt tight. Damien noticed me trying to rotate it and said, almost casually, "You should let me have it resized before it gets stuck." I hesitated. My father's ring had become something I touched whenever I felt lonely, a reflex, a pulse point. But he was my husband, and the suggestion sounded practical. "Just for a day or two," he said. I let him slide it off my finger. I remember the pale indentation it left behind, the strange nakedness of my hand. The next day he said the jeweler needed longer. Then he said the stone was being reset. Then he said he'd bring it back after a meeting. He didn't. When I asked again, he looked irritated. "Do you want a properly fitted ring or not?" Something in me almost activated then, some protective reflex, some instinct inherited from my father and strengthened by pregnancy. But I was tired. So tired. And exhausted women make bargains with discomfort all the time. We tell ourselves we'll deal with it tomorrow. We tell ourselves love deserves one more chance to explain. Tomorrow I found Sienna on social media. Not through Damien, through a tagged photo from a restaurant opening. She was young, glossy, famous for being photographed more than for doing anything. Her lipstick was perfect, her smile was practiced. She had one hand on Damien's shoulder in the kind of intimate pose women adopt when they already feel claimed, and on her hand was my ring. I dropped my phone so hard the screen cracked. That should have been the moment I left immediately, packed a bag, called a lawyer, burned the house down emotionally if not literally. But grief and betrayal rarely make you efficient. Instead I shook. I sat on the bathroom floor and shook while my baby rolled inside me like she could feel my pulse becoming erratic. And then I got up, washed my face, and waited for Damien to come home. He arrived close to midnight smelling faintly of whiskey and expensive cologne that wasn't his. I showed him the photo. For the first time in our marriage, his expression didn't rearrange itself fast enough. The guilt was there, only for a second. Then it vanished. "That was a misunderstanding," he said. "She is wearing my wedding ring. It doesn't mean what you think." "What exactly am I supposed to think?" His jaw tightened. "That I loaned a piece of jewelry for an event because she was working with one of my branding teams and they needed something last minute." I stared at him. Even now, after everything, I can still remember the madness of that answer. Not just the lie itself, but the arrogance required to believe I might accept it. "You gave another woman my wedding ring," I said slowly. "For styling, you haven't been wearing it. Because you took it. Because it needed reset. And instead of returning it to your pregnant wife, you put it on your mistress." His eyes hardened. There it was. The shift. The mask slipping. "I'm done being spoken to like a criminal in my own house." I laughed then. A broken, shocked sound. "Your own house." He stepped closer, voice low. "You need to calm down. Don't tell me to calm down. You are spiraling. I am seeing you clearly." The silence that followed felt dangerous, and then he said the cruelest thing he had ever said to me at that point, and perhaps one of the cruelest he ever would. "Maybe if you spent less time monitoring me and more time controlling yourself, this pregnancy would be easier on everyone." I don't remember slapping him. No, I know I did because my palm stung afterward and there was a bright mark on his face. We both froze. Then he smiled. Not kindly, not sadly, but victorious, as if I had just handed him something he could use. He walked out of the bedroom, and 10 minutes later a driver appeared downstairs with instructions to take me to a boutique hotel for rest. I refused. Damien didn't. "Come back up." The staff stopped meeting my eyes. I knew then that if I stayed in that house, I would be trapped inside his version of events by morning. So I called Ava. She arrived in sweatpants and fury. She helped me pack a suitcase while Donnie loaded pillows, prenatal vitamins, and half my closet into the back of their car. Not one member of staff tried to stop me. That hurt almost as much as everything else. The silence of witnesses is its own kind of violence. When I got to Ava's apartment above the bakery, I thought I would collapse. Instead, I sat on the edge of the guest bed while Rayan tapped the window and remembered the tracker. My hands were shaking so hard I almost mistyped the password. The app had not been opened in years. For one wild second I thought maybe the battery would be dead, the signal gone, the whole secret rendered useless by time. Then the map loaded. A pulsing dot appeared in the city. Not at a jeweler, not at a house, not even at Damien's office, at a penthouse across town. I had never seen before. I stared at the screen until my heart slowed enough to think. Then I whispered, "Okay." Ava leaned over my shoulder. "What is that?" I told her everything. Not just about the ring, about Matteo, about my father, about the tracker buried in the setting, about the way Damien had looked at me when I slapped him, like he had just gotten permission to destroy me. Ava listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Good." I blinked. "Good, good," she repeated, "because that means he made a mistake." The next morning, Damien's lawyer sent divorce papers. Not a discussion, not a separation agreement. Divorce papers, grounds, emotional instability, physical aggression, and concern for fetal well-being. I read those words in Ava's kitchen while cinnamon rolls cooled in the next room and nearly threw up. He was moving fast, too fast. That meant he had been planning this. The papers requested temporary restrictions on my access to shared assets pending evaluation of my mental state. They implied I had become erratic, unsafe, obsessive. There was even a paragraph suggesting my stress and unpredictability might make me an unfit custodial parent after the birth unless safeguards were established. By the time I got to the end, my hands were numb. He wasn't just leaving me, he was building a case to take my child. And that was the moment. Something inside me changed. Not snapped. Not hardened. It became clear there is a kind of strength pregnancy can summon in a woman when fear stops being personal and becomes maternal. Until then, I had been grieving a marriage. After that, I was defending a future. My daughter's future. The life inside me had turned from symbol into anchor, and I knew with an animal certainty that I could not afford despair. I called Dr. Nia Patel, my obstetrician, and asked whether anyone had tried to access my records. Pause on the line told me everything. "Yeah," she said carefully. "A legal office requested copies under urgent review language. We declined pending your consent." I closed my eyes. "Did my husband send them, yes?" "I'm going to need copies of everything for my lawyer." Another pause. Soft. "This time, Lila, is there something I need to know about your safety?" I looked down at my stomach, round beneath one of Ava's oversized t-shirts, and for the first time I answered honestly, double quotes, yes. By evening I had a lawyer. His name was Malcolm Reed, and he had once handled an estate dispute for my father. He was not flashy. He did not perform outrage for effect. He just listened, steepled his fingers, and asked me to repeat every detail in exact order, including the dates Damien had taken my ring, frozen accounts, removed me from the house, and filed for divorce when I finished. Malcolm asked one question. "Did your husband know the ring contained anything besides sentimental value?" I hesitated. "I don't think so." He nodded slowly. "Then why steal that ring specifically? Why not buy his mistress another one?" I opened my mouth, closed it, because I had been so fixated on the humiliation of seeing it on another woman's, and that I had not fully asked the more dangerous question, why that ring? Malcolm arranged for me to meet with Matteo the next morning. Matteo was older now, his hands more lined, his shoulders slightly bowed. But the moment he saw my face, he knew something was wrong. I showed him the social media photos, I showed him the tracker movements, I showed him the divorce filing. He went pale in a way that made me feel the room tilt. "There's more," he said quietly. My mouth went dry. "More than the tracker?" He nodded. I sat down because suddenly standing felt uncertain. Your father built 2 hidden features into that ring, Matteo said. The tracker was one, the other was a keyed access point. Not a key in the literal sense, more like a trigger. There are trust documents and encrypted holdings your father locked behind physical authentication. He did not trust digital security. He believed things tied to your future should require something personal to access them. Malcolm leaned forward. "What holdings?" Matteo looked at me with deep regret. "Gabriel did not tell you everything before he died because he thought there would be time. The rest came out in fragments that slowly assembled themselves into the first truly shocking shape of my marriage. Years before Damien became the polished darling of luxury development, he had been a rising entrepreneur with brilliant instincts and no stable backing. My father had met him through a restoration project. Damien had wanted to convert a historic building into a boutique property but lacked sufficient capital. Banks hesitated. My father, impressed by his vision and charmed by his attention to me even then, had invested privately through a trust structure meant to benefit me in the future. The investment had exploded in value. As Damien's company grew, those original instruments converted into a controlling block of shares, held in a trust that named me as primary beneficiary. I stared at Matteo, certain I had misunderstood. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Malcolm answered for him, voice very calm. "But depending on the exact structure, you may not simply be Damien Vale's wife. You may be the majority owner of the empire he thinks belongs to him." The room went silent. I laughed once because it was too absurd not to. "No, if that were true, I would know." "Not necessarily," Malcolm said. "If the trust was dormant, privately held, and managed under specific activation conditions, you may never have interacted with it directly, especially if your father intended full transfer later." Matteo swallowed. "Gabriel worried that wealth would change how people approached you. He wanted you protected until the right time. The ring was supposed to activate access when you were ready." I felt cold all over again. Damien knew something. He had to. Maybe not everything, but enough to target the ring, enough to build a legal attack while I was pregnant, enough to strip me of credibility before I discovered what was mine. When we checked the tracker again, the dot had moved. Not to Sienna's apartment, to a private bank, the sort with frosted glass, discreet signage, and employees trained to recognize wealthy panic without reacting to it. Malcolm did not hesitate. Within hours he had filed emergency motions to freeze certain marital transfers pending investigation. He moved faster than Damien expected, and that, I think, saved me. Men like my husband depend on momentum, on women freezing while they rearrange the story. Malcolm's refusal to freeze unsettled the board before I ever spoke a word, but we still needed proof. The ring kept moving, from the bank to Damien's office, from his office to the penthouse, from the penthouse to a lake house his mother insisted no one else knew about, and then to a law office that specialized in trust. Restructuring. Every movement felt like a taunt. Every ping on the map was proof that my husband wasn't just cheating on me. He was hunting something. Around that time, Sienna called me. I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number, and I was exhausted from legal meetings, blood pressure checks, and the kind of emotional vigilance that drains you down to the bone. But something made me pick up. Her voice was not what I expected. No smugness, no performative innocence, just nervousness. "Is this Lila?" "Yes." There was a long pause. Then, "I think Damien lied to me." I nearly hung up. Instead I said, "That would make two of us." She exhaled shakily. "He told me you were separated." He said the marriage had been over 4 months. "He said you were unstable and refusing to sign papers because you wanted money." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I don't need his money. I know that now." "What changed?" Another pause. I found the divorce filing date. He was still sleeping with me while pretending he was trying to save things with you for the baby, and ... double quotes. She hesitated. "He lost his temper last night when I asked why he was so obsessed with a ring he said came from a dead marriage." My spine straightened. "What did he say?" Nothing directly, but he snatched it off the dresser and told me never to take it out of the penthouse unless he said so. Then he called someone and asked if the access issue could be bypassed, without the beneficiary present. I closed my eyes. Access issue. There it was. She kept talking, words spilling now. "I know how this sounds. I know I'm not the victim here, but I didn't know, not at first, and when I saw you at that gala, invitation preview, pregnant, ... double quotes." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm not a monster. No, just useful to one. Why are you calling me?" I asked. "Because I think he's planning something big at the Vale Meridian Board Gala this weekend. He told me to wear the ring. He said after that night, everything would finally be his. The gala, the same event where I would eventually see her in red beneath the chandelier, only when she called. That night had not happened yet. It was approaching, and suddenly it became something else. Not a social event. A deadline. The next 48 hours felt like standing inside a storm while trying to stitch together a parachute." Malcolm dug into corporate filings. Ava barely let me out of her sight. Dr. Patel monitored my blood pressure, which had started climbing every time my phone buzzed. Donnie made me soups I was too anxious to taste. Matteo examined old design notes from my father and confirmed the ring's access mechanism corresponded to a storage archive number Malcolm had uncovered in the trust paperwork. Meanwhile, Damien escalated. He sent me messages that swung wildly between icy legal language and intimate, Manipulation. You don't have to make this uglier than it is. Think about the baby. You are being influenced by people who do not understand our world. Come home and we can settle this privately. Then, when I didn't respond, if you force this publicly, you will regret it. That one I saved. Sometimes, the most useful evidence is the thing a man sends when he thinks fear still works. The real turning point came from someone I had almost forgotten to include in the story of my marriage. Teresa Damien, mother's longtime housekeeper. She had worked in Celeste's lake house for 12 years and once slipped me ginger tea at a family dinner when morning sickness hit so hard. I had to hide in the powder room. She called Ava's bakery asking for me by my maiden name. When I met her in a church parking lot the next morning, she handed me a small flash drive. I shouldn't have taken this, she said, eyes shining with nerves. But I heard what they were saying. I'm your husband. Mrs. Vale, a lawyer from the city. My throat tightened. Sangwasha looked down. That if they could make you look unstable before the baby came, they could control the trust through emergency guardianship arguments. Mrs. Vale said a pregnant woman under emotional distress could be portrayed as incapable of handling complex financial matters. Your husband said once the board saw him as a stabilizing parent and executive, no one would fight him. For a second all I could hear was blood rushing in my ears. Teresa kept talking. They were at the lake house. I turned on the old baby monitor recording function from the guest wing because I was frightened. I copied what I could. My fingers tightened around the flash drive so hard it cut into my palm. There is betrayal, and then there is listening to people strategize. Your erasure while your child grows beneath your heartbeat. I thanked her with tears in my eyes. She shook her head and said, your father tipped me every Christmas, even when he barely knew me. He said kindness should travel. Maybe this is mine coming back. When Malcolm listened to the recording, he went still in that dangerous lawyer way that means rage has turned useful. On the file, Damien's voice was unmistakable. He sounded tired, irritated, superior. She's emotional, isolated, and increasingly reactive, he said. That slap alone helps. If we frame the pregnancy as exacerbating pre-existing instability, the board will be relieved to deal with me instead of her. Celeste's voice followed, cool as winter glass. And after the birth, by then it won't matter. Once the trust is consolidated and the company stabilizes, custody becomes negotiation. Negotiation. My baby. My body shook so hard Ava wrapped both arms around me from behind while the audio kept playing. Then came the line that changed everything, the lawyer on the recording asked. And the ring? Damien answered. If the old man built the access through jewelry, I'll force a workaround. If not, she'll sign once she realizes how exposed she is. I will never forget the way Malcolm looked at me after that. Not pity, not concern. Certainty. Just admitted intent, coercion, and fraud strategy, he said. Now we make sure he says it in a room he can't control. The day of the gala, I barely slept. My daughter moved restlessly all night as if she too could sense something massive approaching. At dawn I sat by Ava's window with both hands on my stomach and whispered everything I wanted her to know in case the day went badly. I told her she was loved before she was seen. I told her none of this was her fault. I told her her grandfather had built protections around us with the strange foresight of men who understand both beauty and danger. Then I got dressed, not in black, not in white, in deep blue, the color whose still water right before a storm breaks. Ava helped zip the back of the dress because my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Donnie kissed my cheek. Malcolm reviewed the final sequence one last time. Sienna had agreed to cooperate fully if Damien incriminated himself publicly, and board members had quietly been notified that emergency trust documentation would be presented before any vote proceeded. Dr. Patel insisted on having a medical team on standby nearby because stress had started tightening my abdomen and warning waves I pretended not to notice as the car pulled up to the hotel where the gala was being held. I saw reporters already outside, lights, cameras, the glossy machinery of public image. Damien loved rooms like that because they rewarded confidence and punished hesitation. He didn't know I had stopped hesitating. Inside, the ballroom glowed gold. Waiters drifted like choreography. Wealth shimmered from every corner. And there, exactly as Sienna had warned, stood Damien with his hand at the base of her back as if she were already replacing me in people's minds. She wore red, she wore my ring, and when she raised a hand to accept a glass of champagne, the diamond caught the light like a signal fire. The moment they saw me, the room changed. Conversations didn't stop all at once. They frayed. Faces turned in stages. Recognition moved outward from the entrance like ripples on water. A few people looked embarrassed for me. A few looked fascinated. A few looked annoyed that real pain had interrupted their networking. Damien went rigid. Then he smiled. Of course. He smiled. He crossed the room wearing concern so expertly it might have fooled anyone who had never been alone with him. Lila, he said quietly, as though I were a volatile patient. You shouldn't be here. I looked him straight in the eye. That's interesting. I was just thinking the same thing about her. Sienna stepped back on cue. Uncertainty widening her eyes just enough to look genuine because this time it was. Damien lowered his voice. Don't do this. Do what? Attend a public event held by the company I apparently know less about than your girlfriend does. His jaw tightened. You are emotional. We can discuss this privately. No. You've had enough privacy. People were openly staring now. Oh, good. He reached for my elbow. I stepped away before he could touch me. Then, Sienna, bless her for at least choosing one decent act at the end of all this, spoke loud enough for half the room to hear. Damien, she said, glancing between us. Why is your wife looking at my ring like that? Wife, not ex-wife. Not unstable woman. Wife. He turned to her, furious, but it was too late. I smiled, not because I felt triumphant, because I knew the trap had just closed. That ring, I said clearly, belongs to me. A murmur ran through the room. Sienna slowly lifted her hand as if noticing the diamond's weight for the first time. You told me it was from a marriage that was already dead. Damien's composure fractured around the edges. Sienna, enough. No. I said, let's not stop now. We've all dressed up for the truth. It would be rude not to serve it. Somewhere behind me, Malcolm stepped forward. So did two board members I recognized. One of them looked grim. The other looked furious. Damien saw them and recalculated instantly. If this is about private marital issues, this is neither the time nor the place. Malcolm's voice was crisp. Actually, Mr. Vale, because tonight's agenda includes trust, representation, executive authority, and fiduciary disclosures, this is exactly the place. The room stilled. I could almost hear Damien's heartbeat from where I stood. What are you talking about? He asked. Malcolm held up a folder. We are talking about the Gabriel Hart Beneficiary Trust. The controlling share block you attempted to access through a misappropriation of personal property, coercive legal action, and fraudulent incapacity strategy against its rightful beneficiary. No one moved. I watched the meaning hit Damien in stages. Recognition, panic, fury, then denial. That's absurd, he said. Lila doesn't control anything in this company. I spoke before Malcolm could. Yes, I said softly, I do. Could for the room leaned toward me. Damien laughed once, sharp and unbelieving. Someone has fed you fantasies. No, I said. My father fed your empire. That landed. Board members exchanged glances. The old money crowd loves many things, but nothing thrills them like hidden power, and nothing disgusts them like a man who thought he could steal it from a pregnant woman in plain sight. Damien enough to sneer. Even if there were dormant trust interests, they would require authentication. I held out my hand toward Sienna. May I? She looked at Damien. He looked ready to kill her with his eyes. Then, slowly, she pulled off the ring and placed it in my palm. The weight of it hit me like memory. For one irrational second, I almost cried. Instead, I turned it over, found the invisible pressure point beneath the setting, and pressed. There was a tiny click. Only Malcolm Mateo, and I knew what it meant. A screen lit on the tablet Malcolm held. Authentication confirmed. A collective intake of breath moved through the room. Damien took one involuntary step backward. Then Malcolm did what lawyers do best when the truth is finally ripe enough to cut open. He laid out everything. The original investment instruments from Gabriel Hart. The trust conversion documents, the beneficiary protections, the attempted access logs from the private bank, the timing of Damien's divorce filing, the frozen accounts, the emergency legal motions, painted me unstable, while I was still under prenatal care. Then came the audio. Teresa's recording filled the ballroom. Damien's own voice drifted through expensive speakers, while he calmly discussed destabilizing me, leveraging my pregnancy, controlling the board, and turning custody into negotiation after securing the trust. You could have set the chandeliers on fire, and still not drawn more attention. By the time the recording ended, Damien looked less like a visionary executive and more like what he had always been beneath the tailoring, a coward in a custom suit. He tried one last tactic. This recording is illegally obtained and contextually distorted. My wife has been unwell for months. She struck me. She's been increasingly irrational. I filed for protection of our child. He said, child with practiced sorrow. I almost admired the performance. Almost. Then Dr. Patel stepped forward from the side of the room where Malcolm had arranged for her to wait. I'm Lila Hart, Vale's physician, she said, and I would like it noted that throughout her pregnancy, the only repeated attempts to distort medical access, escalate her stress, and compromise her care came from her husband and his legal team. The room erupted into whispers. Damien stared at her as though betrayal itself had taken human form. But we weren't done. Malcolm lifted one final envelope. There is one more matter, he said. Mr. Val has privately suggested concerns regarding paternity in preliminary filings not yet served. Those concerns are unsupported and known by him to be false. I hadn't known he had done that. Not officially. Malcolm had chosen not to tell me until the moment we could use it. A mercy, probably, or strategy. Either way, the next few seconds changed the air in my lungs. Malcolm withdrew a certified lab result. Mr. Vale ordered a prenatal paternity test through indirect legal channels. The result confirmed paternity. Who suppressed it? The words hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. For weeks, maybe months. He had known our daughter was his, and still tried to paint me as unstable, unfaithful, unfit. I pressed one hand to my stomach as the baby moved sharply, and a sound escaped me that was half laugh, half grief. Not because I needed that proof I had never betrayed him, but because hearing how far he was willing to go stripped the last illusion clean away. Damien lunged toward Malcolm. Security moved faster, hands caught his arms. Voices rose. Sienna stumbled back, horrified. Celeste appeared from nowhere, hissing his name in disbelief. Reporters outside must have sensed blood in the water because flashes began strobing from the ballroom entrance. And then, because apparently life believes in timing as much as irony, a fierce contraction seized my body so suddenly I gripped the edge of a table and gasped. Ava was beside me instantly. I tried to answer and see OULDN tangle quotes T. Another contraction rolled through me. Deeper this time, pulling a cry from somewhere low in my chest. Dr. Patel was at my side within seconds. All business. Breathe. Don't panic. It may be but we're not taking chances. Across the room, Damien twisted against security, face drained of color now for an entirely different reason. Lila, he shouted. Lila, wait. That was the first time all night he sounded afraid. Not afraid of losing money, not afraid of losing status, afraid of seeing the consequences of himself. I looked at him while another contraction tightened my whole body, and I understood in one clean, devastating instant that he had never once believed I would become dangerous to him. Hurt, yes. Broken, maybe, but not dangerous. Not someone who could stand in a room he built, in a story he wrote, and set the ending on fire. He had spent months treating me like a woman he could edit now. He was watching me become permanent. They moved me quickly, carefully, through side exits and into a waiting vehicle while the gala behind us dissolved into scandal. The city lights streaked past the window in fractured ribbons. Ava held my hand. Dr. Patel monitored my breathing. Malcolm stayed behind to handle the immediate legal collapse. And later he would tell me the board suspended Damien that very night. By morning, emergency injunctions froze his executive authority. By noon, fraud investigators were in his offices. But in the car, none of that mattered. Only the pain, only the fear, only the tiny life inside me shifting toward daylight before I was ready. I remember whispering over and over, "Not yet, baby." Not yet though, whether I was pleading with her or with my own body. I still don't know. At the hospital they stabilized me first. The contractions had triggered, but labor wasn't progressing quickly enough to demand immediate delivery. Stress, Dr. Patel said, had pushed my body to the edge. I needed monitoring, fluids, rest, and every possible barrier between me and fervor. Shocked at rest, as if rest were a room I could just walk into. The night blurred into machines, dim lights, cool cloths on my forehead. Ava curled in a chair, refusing to sleep. Donnie bringing coffee at impossible hours. Nurses who spoke to me with a kind authority that makes you feel briefly safe. Around dawn, when the sky outside the window lightened to pearl gray, I asked for my phone. There were dozens of messages. Some from numbers I knew, some from numbers I didn't. A few from people who suddenly remembered I existed now that my humiliation had become public spectacle. And 8 from Damien. The first were, "Frantic. Please tell me where you are. I didn't know about the paternity filing language. I can fix this. Please answer." Then came the ones that finally told the truth. "You've destroyed everything. Do you have any idea what you've done? This didn't have to happen this way." Then the last one, sent at 3:12 in the morning. "I never thought you would turn on me like this." Stared at that message for a long time. Turn on me, as if exposing his betrayal were betrayal. As if men like him experienced consequences only as injustice. I deleted the thread. Later that morning, Malcolm arrived with updates. Damien had been removed, pending investigation. Celeste had left the gala before reporters could corner her. But not before several board members witnessed her trying to pressure others into protecting the family. Sienna had provided a formal statement. Teresa was under legal protection. The bank confirmed attempted access anomalies tied to the trust archive. And because Damien's own recording captured intent to weaponize my pregnancy and mental state, the custody angle he had hoped to use was dead before our daughter was even born. I listened, tired beyond language, and asked only one question. "Is it over?" Malcolm gave me the sort of honest look good lawyers say for moments that matter. "The worst of his power over you is over," he said. "The rest will take time." He was right. Justice is rarely a lightning strike. It is usually paperwork, testimony, waiting, and surviving long enough to see the shape of the truth hold. My daughter came 3 weeks later, not at a gala, not in a dramatic rush, just before dawn after a long, grinding night of labor that made everything else in my life seem suddenly abstract. Ava held one leg and cried more than I did. Dr. Patel spoke to me like a commander and a prayer at once. And when they finally laid that tiny, furious, perfect girl on my chest, I looked at her wrinkled face and burst open in a way no betrayal had managed to do. I named her Gabriella, after my father, after the man who built hidden safeguards into beauty because he knew love without protection is often just hope dressed up as fate. Gabriella had my mouth, Damien's dark hair, and a cry that sounded like protest itself. She was strong from the beginning, hungry from the beginning, alive in that radiant, demanding way newborns are, as if they arrive already certain the world owes them care. Holding her changed the texture of my grief, not because she erased it, because she gave it somewhere to go. The months that followed were hard in all the ways no one I was healing physically while feeding a newborn every 2 hours and navigating legal warfare between nabs. My body felt foreign. My emotions ambushed me. Some days I would be fine folding tiny onesies, and then suddenly I'd see the faint pale line where my ring had once rested during pregnancy and start crying so hard I had to sit on the floor. But grief in the presence of a child is different. You don't get to disappear into it fully. There's always a bottle to warm, a diaper to change, a forehead to kiss. Survival becomes less poetic and more practical. That practicality saved me, so did the women around me. Ava, who moved my old reading chair into the nursery and pretended not to notice when I fell asleep in it. Donnie, who stocked my freezer like a military quartermaster. Dr. Patel, who reminded me that trauma can look like irritability, numbness, fear, rage, exhaustion, and none of it meant I was failing motherhood. Teresa, who sent embroidered blankets with no return address because she didn't want gratitude, only peace. Even Sienna, in her own uneasy way, contributed. She testified fully, publicly. She admitted Damien had lied about the state of our marriage, had used her to stage a future, had instructed her to wear my ring that night because he thought symbolism mattered when asserting possession. Her statement helped close the loops he might otherwise have wriggled through. As for Damien, the fall was not cinematic in the way movies promise. There was no single moment where he dropped to his knees and understood himself. Men like him rarely arrive at moral clarity, but there were consequences, plenty of them. The board removed him permanently. The fraud investigation deepened when hidden. Liabilities, surface liabilities he had planned to cover through trust, manipulation, and unauthorized restructuring. His legal team distanced itself. Friends, who once admired his polish, discovered they valued their own reputations more than his. And when the custody hearing finally came, he entered the courtroom no longer looking like a man in control of a narrative, just a tired, angry man facing the documented cost of his own arrogance. I will never forget that hearing. He tried one last version of charm. He spoke about concern, about misunderstanding, about how painful public conflict had been for everyone, but the evidence was a mountain by then. The recording, the financial timelines, the account freezes, the suppressed paternity result, the misuse of my property, the attempt to position pregnancy as incapacity. When the judge asked why he had given my wedding ring to another woman while still married to me, he had no answer that didn't make him sound exactly like what he was. Petty, cruel, entitled, he got supervised visitation to start, limited, structured, earned, not assumed. When we stepped outside afterward, he asked to speak to me privately. I considered refusing. Then I looked at Gabriella sleeping in her carrier, so small and oblivious to the wreckage that had preceded her, and decided I wanted to hear whatever he thought remained to say. We stood beneath the cold stone overhang of the courthouse while reporters hovered at a distance. Damien looked thinner, older, not because time had moved quickly, but because consequences had. I loved you, he said. It was almost funny. Almost I looked at him for a long time before answering, I think. I said carefully, you loved being believed by me. His face changed. Not with remorse, with recognition, which can be worse. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down at the baby carrier. I never wanted to lose her. That was the only sentence he spoke that day that sounded close to true. No, I said. You just never thought your actions would cost you anything. Then I walked away. I did not look back. In the year that followed, I learned that rebuilding a life is less about grand reinvention and more about refusing small surrender. You get out of bed, you feed the baby, you answer the lawyer, you sign the document, you laugh when you can, you cry when you must. You stop apologizing for surviving something someone else chose to do to you. The trusts transferred fully once authentication and legal review were complete. My father's investment had grown into more than I could have imagined, but what mattered most to me was not the wealth. It was the proof that I had never been as powerless as Damien needed me to feel. I took my place on the board. That sentence still makes me smile, not because I care about boardrooms as symbols of prestige, but because the first time I walked into one as its rightful authority, I was carrying milk stains under a silk blouse and had a teething ring in my bag beside legal briefs. There was something almost holy in that contradiction. Motherhood and power, side by side, refusing to cancel each other out. I did not run the company the way Damien had. I had no interest in empire for empire's sake. Instead, I restructured, cleaned house, sold vanity projects, expanded affordable housing divisions my father would have actually respected, established maternal health grants in Gabriella's name, redirected a portion of annual profits to legal support services for pregnant women, facing financial coercion or domestic manipulation. People called it revenge, dressed as philanthropy. They were wrong. Revenge wants the other person to suffer. I wanted fewer women trapped away. I had been. Sometimes justice looks like a courtroom victory. Sometimes it looks like making sure the trap that nearly closed on you can't close so easily on someone else. As for the ring, I didn't wear it for a long time. After the gala, after the hospital, after the birth, it sat in a velvet box in my dresser drawer. Some nights I would take it out and let it rest in my palm, turning it under the lamp until the diamond scattered quiet little stars across the room. I would think about my father's hands, about Matea, about the young woman I had been when Damien proposed, about how symbols can be stolen, misused, paraded, but still remain yours if you survive long enough to name the truth around them. When Gabriella turned 1, I wore the ring again for the first time, not for Damien, not for marriage, for me, for the version of myself that had nearly vanished beneath gaslighting, humiliation, and fear, for the pregnant woman who walked into a ballroom full of people ready to believe the worst about her and left with her life cracked open but still her own. And maybe, if I'm honest, for the line my father engraved inside the band, the line I used to think meant love would always come to save me. You are never lost to love. I understand it differently now. Love did not save me, because a man kept his promises. Love saved me because my father built care into steel, because my sister answered the phone at midnight, because a doctor recognized danger, because a housekeeper risked her livelihood, because a baby gave me a reason not to collapse. Because somewhere under all the manipulation, I loved myself enough stop accepting a story designed to erase me. People still ask about that night at the gala. They always want the glamorous version, the public humiliation, the mistress in red, the hidden tracker, the exposed recording, the dramatic fall of a wealthy man in front of his peers. And yes, all of that happened, but the real story was never the ring. It was what the ring led me back to. Not money, not status, not even justice. Though I got more of that than Damien ever expected. It led me back to my own mind, my own instincts, my own name the first time. Gabriella was old enough to curl her little fingers around the ring. She held it up to the light and laughed at the sparkle. I kissed her hair and told her it belonged to her grandfather before it belonged to anyone else. And that one day, when she was older, I would tell her the whole story. Not as a story about betrayal, as a story about warning signs, about hidden strength. About why no one, no matter how charming, how wealthy, how admired, gets to decide your reality for you. And if she ever asks me what I felt, really felt, in that ballroom when I saw another woman wearing my wedding ring while my daughter kicked beneath my heart, I will tell her the truth. I felt shattered, I felt humiliated, I felt furious. But beneath all of that, so quiet I almost missed it, I felt something else. The moment a woman stops begging to be believed and starts gathering proof. The moment fear turns into focus. The moment the hunted realizes she knows the path home better than the hunter ever did. That was the beginning, not the end. And if you want to know what became of Damien Vale, the answer is simple enough. He still exists. Men like him always do, in newspapers for a while, in whispers after that. In smaller apartments, in rooms where people once stood when he entered and now merely nod. He sees his daughter under conditions the court decides, not the conditions he would have bought. He ages inside the truth he tried to outsource to me. I don't spend much time thinking about whether that's punishment enough. My life is too full now for that every morning. Gabriella runs into my room before sunrise with one sock on and 1,000 opinions. Ava still drops off bread no matter how many times I tell her I can order my own. Donnie still sends too much soup. Mateo still pretends he's retired while secretly making beautiful things in the back of his shop. Teresa sends birthday cards. Dr. Patel gets pictures of Gabriella every year on the day she was born. And me, I sleep with the windows open now. I laugh easily again. I no longer confuse intensity for safety. Sometimes, on hard days, I touch the ring and think about how strange it is that the thing meant to symbolize my marriage ended up revealing its rot. How the object he used to humiliate me became the instrument of his undoing. How my father, years before any of this happened, had somehow understood a truth I would only fully learn much later. That women are often told to trust love blindly, when what they really need is love that leaves them a way out. So if there is a moral to any of this, it is not that karma is dramatic, though sometimes it is. It is not that rich men always fall, though some do. It is not even that betrayal comes with warning signs, though it often does. It is at the moment someone begins building a story in which your pain is proof against you. You must stop asking to be handled gently and start asking what they are trying to hide. And if the answer is everything, then you do what I did. You breathe through the heartbreak, you protect the child, you follow the signal. And when the truth finally lights up in your hands, you do not look away.